Welcome back to the disturbing side of Reddit. In July 2025, a user posted to the RBI subreddit with a question about his younger brother. He explained that his brother had just returned home after spending a year traveling through Asia, and that almost immediately something felt off. The posts were written while everything was still ongoing, before doctors were involved, before anyone had left, and before there was any explanation for what was happening inside his parents' home. And all he knew was that the person who came back didn't seem to be the same brother who left. I believe my brother has been replaced. I want to preface by saying I'm not mentally ill, and this isn't the schizo post you're expecting. I have no better way to articulate what I'm thinking right now. My brother just came back from his gap year, traveling Asia in hopes that he'd find himself. We were never really close, so his lack of contact during this year didn't strike me with too much alarm, but my parents have informed me of 3 separate incidents in which they needed to contact consulate authorities to ask about him. He's a mummy's boy, so this did seem very out of character. We hosted a dinner for my brother's return to the country, but upon seeing him at the airport, it was like a stranger tried to draw my brother from memory and pass that as the real thing. He looked completely different. He was severely underweight. He looked 2 to 3 inches shorter, and he seemed bedraggled and unkempt. Believe me, this was the opposite of my brother prior to his trip. He has always been a germaphobe, someone who washes his hands twice to make sure he eliminates all the bacteria. But this guy, he smelled horrendous. He didn't even talk to us, or properly acknowledge our existence. He begrudgingly gave our mum a hug and our dad a handshake. He didn't say hello to me. It's been around 2 weeks, and what I've been hearing from my parents is horrifying. Apparently, he's been extremely active at night and sleeping during the day. They can only get faint murmurs out of him, and his speech is becoming increasingly nonsensical. He doesn't shower. He doesn't seem to eat. He spends all his time locked away in his room, doing something, my parents don't know what, extremely loudly. They've already contacted a doctor, and he's on a waiting list to see a therapist. I suggested getting the police involved, but they were determined not to. My mum is afraid, and I don't know what to do. I've volunteered to stay over and be the peacekeeper, as our parents are getting old, and I'm personally worried about that psycho doing something to them. However, my parents have too rejected this. I was never too close with my brother, but this isn't him at all. Does anyone know what could have caused this, or what we can do? It's like someone kidnapped my brother and replaced him with the dude from Castaway. A hard drug addiction is the most likely answer. DNA testing would clear this up real quick. If the result is a match, I'd suggest you seek counseling for both of you. In that case, either he's done a lot of hard drugs and needs help, or you have some tendencies toward delusion. If the DNA is not a match, you've got your hard proof and can probably get the help you need. The kind of resources needed to pull off the scheme you're describing would make it a very odd way to spend one's time. Finding someone similar, looking enough to fool not only airport authorities, but also family, has got to be difficult and expensive. If your family isn't high profile, I'm talking head of state, Fortune 500 C-suite or otherwise ultra wealthy, it would not make any sense to pull something like this off. Even then, it's such a crazy scheme. I can't imagine anyone actually trying it. And to what end? An inheritance scheme or something? My family are quite controversial, particularly in Vietnam, which is mainly why my parents were against my brother's gap year to begin with. I can't elaborate further on that regard, unfortunately, but there is definitely reason for something like this to happen. Do you mean that you literally think someone else is pretending to be your brother? Or are you speaking more figuratively, and you think your brother is just acting differently? It was meant to be figuratively, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't genuinely concerned. He later updated the post, writing, "I've seen a lot of people suggest theories, including drug use or underlying mental health issues. I had my mother over today, primarily to talk about my brother's condition. My wife was against mentioning the DNA test I ordered, so they are still unaware of my suspicions. My mum told me about the 3 incidents involving the authorities in Vietnam. The first one was a wellness check, after my parents heard nothing from him for about a week. This might have been overzealousness on my mum's part. The second and third instances were actually a part of the same correspondence, but turned out to be much more disturbing than I thought. Local authorities were worried my brother and 2 other female friends had been trafficked in Laos, as they failed to return to Vietnam on time. However, this was resolved after half a month. I have no idea the status of his friends, but I suspect they all returned to Vietnam together. With regards to my brother at present, my parents have since agreed to my suggestions of adding cameras to communal areas, as well as installing a doorstop in their own room. They have also given me news that they will go private to seek psychiatric treatment for him, starting next week. We'll keep you all updated. 2 days later, there was an update. Family member missing. My brother has disappeared. My parents only noticed this morning, but it's likely he fled sometime last night, as we booked psychiatric treatment for him on Tuesday. He's seriously unwell, and on another thread, people have claimed his condition might have been exacerbated through drug use. We don't want the police involved. We don't want this to be a public affair, as our family can't afford it right now. We live in a semi-rural town near the Swiss border, so we're hoping to find him before he hurts himself. How can we go about finding him? Any help would be appreciated. The comments were unsurprisingly in favour of the OP going to the police. You do want the police involved, trust me. I understand not wanting the police involved, but there is no other choice. I've read your other post about him, and he might not only be a danger to himself, but also other people. You shouldn't delay contacting the police any longer. Nothing good will come out of that. Best of luck, man. Based on your other post, you absolutely need police involved. You're worried that this can become public, but it will be worse if he hurts himself or others. Once he is found, you need to commit him immediately. But the OP and his family wouldn't listen. 4 days later, there was one final update. Hey all, I thought I'd share an update. This will also be my last post on this site, and I wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone who commented. To those who provided genuine help and support, I couldn't be more thankful. My brother is dead. We found him in the early hours of this morning, and I've spent the rest of the day finding the courage to make this post. Maybe it's shock, but I'd like to think he died over in Vietnam, and upon his return, his body was simply catching up, rather than prolong his torment. You all do a wonderful service here, so please keep doing what you're doing. All the best. After that, the OP stopped replying. Everything just ended, right where things were supposed to start making sense. People began going back through what he'd written to try and piece it together properly, but the more they looked at it, the less straightforward it seemed. Some suggested the family might have been Vietnamese nationals living in France, possibly tied in some way to the South Vietnamese elite during the war. France had been the former colonial power, and a number of families connected to that period relocated there after the communist takeover. Others focused on the parents' ages. If they're in their 80s now, they would have been young adults during the conflict, old enough to have been involved in something, and old enough to have a past that didn't fully disappear. Then, people started looking into his comment history. He'd mentioned that his brother was born via surrogate, despite surrogacy being illegal in France for decades, which might explain why involving the police was something they were trying to avoid. There was also a comment about his brother travelling to Asia to find himself. Did he mean that in a metaphorical sense, where people travel abroad while young? Or did he mean that in a literal sense? What if he'd gone looking for something connected to his family, somewhere where their name might still carry any weight? Then came another theory. Shot in the dark, but as a French person, could this be the family of the Laos heirs to the throne who got exiled? I'm thinking of Solivong Savang, who's a known public figure, is exiled in France near the Swiss border, and is quite controversial in France and in the ancient French colonies. He also has a family he tries very hard to hide from the public eye, hence why living in a village near the Swiss border when he could afford the best places in Paris, which would explain not reaching out to the police, which would put his family in the public eye. The only thing that doesn't match is the age, as Solivong Savang is a little over 60 if memory serves right. But that's all we were left with. Speculation. The OP never returned, and we never really got an answer as to whether the post itself was real or who was behind it. Whatever happened to his brother, and whatever happened overseas, remains a mystery. One of the more strange things about Reddit isn't always the posts themselves, but the accounts behind them. Profiles sit there for years, filled with comments, opinions, and fragments of someone's personality. But then, one day, they stop posting. Most of the time, it's nothing. People forget passwords, lose interest, get busy, and drift away from the site without thinking twice about it. But sometimes an account doesn't just fade out. It freezes at a specific moment in time. And when you come across it later, and when you know who was behind the account, their profile takes on a whole new meaning. The username was saltyinteraction438. The account has since been banned, but screenshots are still available online and show what was posted before it disappeared. A lot of the comments were completely ordinary. In a thread where someone asked how to get their crush to like them, the reply was "be yourself, and if they don't like you, then they're not the right person for you." In another discussion about Christmas and what people were hoping for, the answer was simply $1 million. But then there were other comments that stood out. Under a post where someone wrote, "I hate myself," the response was, "You can always harm others." And in another thread asking how people imagined themselves dying, the reply was being shot by the police. Taken together, the account feels inconsistent. Normal posts mixed in with comments that lean towards something darker. But what makes it disturbing isn't just the tone of those replies, it's who was behind them, because the account belonged to the person who would later carry out a school shooting in Finland. And at the time of the shooting, he was just 12 years old. The shooting took place at Vietola School in Vantaa, Finland's fourth largest city, just north of Helsinki. The school operates across two campuses, Liljati and Jokiranta, and the incident happened at the Jokiranta site. Around 800 students attend the school, ranging from 7 to 16 years old, with roughly 90 staff members. It was the first day back after the Easter weekend when, at around 9 a.m, a 12-year-old student entered a 6th grade classroom wearing a mask and noise-cancelling headphones. He was carrying a revolver with him when 3 of his classmates were shot. Police received the first emergency call at 9:17, and a lockdown was immediately put in place inside the school and nearby institutions. A teacher reached the classroom shortly after the shooting began and managed to persuade the student to leave the room, and he fled the building on foot. While running, he fired several shots into the air, including one in the direction of a parked car. Police located him less than an hour later in Siltamäki in North Helsinki and took him into custody at 9:58. The revolver was recovered at the scene of his arrest. Of the 3 victims, a boy died from his injuries. The other 2, both girls, were seriously wounded. The handgun used in the attack was legally owned by a close relative of the suspect, and initial reports suggested the motive may have been bullying, as the suspect reportedly told investigators he had been bullied at school. However, police later stated that their investigation had not found evidence supporting that claim. But surprisingly, the boy hasn't faced any criminal charges. You see, in Finland, the age of criminal responsibility is 15. Because he was 12 at the time of the shooting, he couldn't be held criminally liable. He wasn't remanded in custody and was instead placed under the care of social services following further questioning. But that doesn't mean there were no consequences at all. While he can't be prosecuted, civil liability is still possible. 2 female teachers from the school have filed a lawsuit seeking a total of €34,000 in damages. The claim includes compensation for pain and suffering, loss of earnings, and legal costs, and this is still ongoing. As of 2025, reports indicate he's changed his name and is continuing his primary education at the age of 14. His identity remains unknown. A few years ago, an account shared a moment on Reddit. It wasn't controversial or anything, and it didn't attract much attention at the time. It was just a small personal photo, shared the way thousands of people share things online every day. But that moment, shared between a father and son, would take a whole different meaning. when the father would make a decision, that would change everything. Outside of Reddit, the man behind the username was Christopher Kuhn, a 27-year-old from New Jersey. He was a father to 2-year-old Caden Trevel, but beyond that, there isn't a huge amount publicly known about him from that time. On Reddit, he was fairly active. He commented in stand-up comedy threads, took part in Overwatch discussions, and posted in movie detail subreddits. If you stumbled across his profile at the time, you wouldn't have thought twice about it. But there's one post on that profile that stands out, one that was pretty sweet at the time, but would later take on a whole different meaning. It was posted back in September 2016 with the title, "My son thinks everything is a phone." In the photo, his young son Caden is holding a computer mouse up to his ear like it's a telephone. As Christopher explained in the comments, it was taken at Christopher's mother's workplace. It was a cute picture to share at the time, although it didn't really get much attention on the site. And so the post sat there as months went by. But less than a year later, on October 3rd, 2017, that image would feel very different. You see, Christopher later admitted that he had been struggling with an opioid addiction. He described it as something that was taking over his life, and something he felt he was losing control of. Money was tight, and according to investigators, he was desperate to keep the addiction going. So on October 3rd, 2017, he entered a Walmart in Tullytown, Pennsylvania, with his 2-year-old son, Caden. At some point inside the store, he placed a $228 soundbar into his cart and left without paying. Security personnel attempted to stop him. He had Caden in the cart at the time. According to reports, he told them, "You can't hold me here," before grabbing his son and walking out as staff contacted police. From there, things escalated quickly. Christopher grabbed his son, got into his Jeep, and before pulling away, tried to tie a sweatshirt over the rear license plate to hide it. He was already driving on a suspended New Jersey license, and he had taken OxyContin and marijuana earlier that day. Meanwhile, Caden had climbed into the rear driver's side of the vehicle. Christopher, too focused on concealing his identity, didn't stop to fasten Caden's seatbelt. Christopher accelerated onto Route 13 and ran a red light, colliding with 2 vehicles, including an SUV that had the right of way. The force of the crash caused his vehicle to roll multiple times. Caden was ejected from the Jeep and thrown onto the roadway. Witnesses later said that after the crash, Christopher got out of the vehicle, looked toward his son, stepped over him, and ran from the scene on foot without a second thought. Police found Christopher a short distance from the crash, hiding in a wooded area nearby. Officers at the scene were already attempting CPR on Caden. According to reports, Christopher refused to give them the boy's name while they were trying to save him. Even after being taken into custody, he would not confirm whether the child was his son, but investigators later established that he was. Caden was transported to Lower Bucks Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. No one else involved in the crash suffered serious injuries. During sentencing, prosecutors pushed back against any suggestion that this had been a momentary lapse in judgment. Deputy District Attorney Robert James told the court that whatever remorse Kuhn was showing now came after the fact. He brought up Kuhn's record, which went back years: theft, fraud, resisting arrest, and even violating a restraining order. There had also been prior incidents involving Caden's mother, Mackenzie Trevel. According to prosecutors, Christopher had previously assaulted her, at one point holding a screwdriver to her neck while she was carrying their newborn son, and on another occasion making threats against her life. The court also heard that he had repeatedly ignored court-ordered drug treatment and that his license had been suspended because of a long history of unsafe driving. In March 2018, after a 3-day trial, Christopher Kuhn was convicted on multiple charges, including homicide by vehicle, DUI, accidents involving death while not properly licensed, retail theft, endangering the welfare of a child, and several related traffic offences. He was found guilty on all counts and was sentenced to 8.5 to 30 years in state prison. Looking back at that image now, it feels different. At the time, it looked like a normal post. but knowing how it ended changes it. Even the username, KillaKuhn, feels unsettling in hindsight. At the time, it probably meant nothing, but when the only personal thing he chose to share on Reddit was a photo of his son, it's hard not to look at the whole profile differently. On its own, it was just a post. Now, it's something else entirely.